The gavel cracked like thunder. Its echo rattled the chamber walls, but the words that followed cut even deeper. Justice Amy Coney Barrett leaned forward, her voice sharp enough to slice through the still air. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, her tone laced with disdain. "This is not a place for theatrics or sentiment. It's a place for land. Perhaps that's something you struggle to understand." The insult landed heavy. Gasps rippled across the courtroom, rolling like a wave against marble columns. Reporters froze mid-keystroke. Camera shutters clicked in nervous bursts. Even the murmurs of spectators fell into silence, the atmosphere shifting from tense anticipation to electrified disbelief. Barrett's glare was steady, her robe draped like armor, her voice wielded like a weapon. She was the embodiment of institutional arrogance, untouchable, unflinching, utterly confident that no one would dare strike back. This was her domain, a courtroom where her word was gospel, and she delivered it with the arrogance of someone used to being the final word. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. Seated beneath the weight of Barrett's accusation, she held her posture with the ease of someone who had carried heavier burdens than words. Her hands rested still, her eyes unblinking, her silence louder than the justice's fury. Where others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, Crockett sat motionless, poised, unbroken. The room began to sense it. That silence wasn't weakness. It was power. For a flicker of a second, Barrett's composure trembled, as if she realized her sharpest weapon had failed to pierce. The imbalance was subtle, but undeniable. The more Barrett pressed, the more Crockett's calm grew unshakable. And in that charged stillness, a storm was gathering, one no robe, no title, no gavel could contain. The gavel cracked again, but this time the sound didn't dominate. It was drowned out by anticipation, by the collective awareness that something unforgettable was about to unfold. Because in the next 10 seconds, Jasmine Crockett would unleash a response no one saw coming. This was never just a spat between two women in a courtroom. To the casual observer, it might have looked like a sharp exchange, the kind that comes and goes in America's endless parade of hearings. But beneath the marble columns and solemn oaths, something far greater was colliding. The future of justice, identity, and truth in America itself. Because Amy Coney Barrett wasn't simply a justice on the bench. She symbolized an entire establishment institution fortified by centuries of hierarchy and tradition, a fortress where power was cloaked in ritual and framed as impartial law. Her voice carried the weight of that system, lofty, dismissive, unmoved by the struggles of those outside its gates. To Barrett, rules were rules because those in power had written them, and defending that order was second nature. But across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, daughter of grit, daughter of struggle, daughter of a people who had been told for generations to wait their turn. She wasn't cloaked in robes or shielded by marble, but in dignity and defiance. Where Barrett represented the gates of power, Crockett represented the people standing outside, pounding, refusing to be ignored. Her silence wasn't passive. It was the voice of every person who had been talked down to, written off, or told they didn't belong in America's highest halls. And so, the stakes surged higher than the case on the docket. This wasn't about a single exchange. It was about who gets to define truth in a country where truth has always been contested. Would it be defined by those who sit in vaulted chambers insulated by titles and robes? Or would it be claimed by those who have carried the weight of inequality yet still stand, unbroken, demanding to be heard? The tension swelled because everyone in that room felt it, even if they couldn't name it. The divide wasn't just Barrett versus Crockett. It was institutional arrogance versus lived experience. It was a contest between power that shames and power that endures. One sought to dominate through dismissal. The other sought to endure through dignity. Barrett leaned in again, determined to reassert control. Her words dripped with the confidence of someone who had never been forced to wonder if she belonged. "You may think passion equals credibility," she declared, her voice echoing against the chamber walls. "But law doesn't bend for feelings. It bends for reason, for disciplined qualities you seem to lack." And just like that, the stakes crystallized into a spectacle. This wasn't merely a judicial reprimand. It was the embodiment of a question echoing across America. Who decides the terms of justice? The robe or the people? It's the institution or the individual who dares to challenge it? Reporters' pens flew faster, as though they understood history was unfolding in real time. Viewers across the nation would soon watch the clip, dissect it, share it, meme it, rage over it. Because this was more than rhetoric, it was raw theater. A performance where the balance of dignity and power teetered on the edge, and the next words out of Barrett's mouth would set the internet ablaze. To understand the electricity of that moment, you have to understand Amy Coney Barrett herself. To her admirers, she was the embodiment of polished legal brilliance, a scholar elevated to the nation's highest bench, armed with precedent, cloaked in authority, and unshakably confident in her place within the American judicial hierarchy. Every word she spoke dripped with certainty, every ruling stamped with the weight of tradition. She didn't just carry law. She wielded it like a sword. But beneath the robes and polished rhetoric lay a deeper truth. Barrett had become a symbol of America's most entrenched power. She rose through the system not by challenging it, but by mirroring it, aligning herself with its narrowest definitions of order, morality, and authority. Her ascent had been praised as groundbreaking, yet critics saw the irony here was a woman who shattered a glass ceiling only to reinforce the walls that had trapped so many others below. Her record was not without controversy. From reproductive rights to questions of civil liberties, Barrett had consistently sided with the entrenched order. Her rulings and public statements often painted a picture of discipline over empathy, tradition over progress, order over lived human struggle. For some, she was a model of judicial restraint. For others, stark reminder of how institutions could cloak exclusion in the language of principle. And the contradictions didn't stop there. Barrett's own life story, often celebrated in glowing profiles, contained its ironies. She had spoken of empathy and family, of being a mother and a judge, of balancing life's burdens. Yet in the courtroom, that same empathy was often nowhere to be found. Her critics accused her of weaponizing her polish, of using her sharp intellect not to uplift, but to diminish, turning the law into a scalpel that cut down those who dared challenge its keepers. It was this reputation for dominance that made her both feared and admired in legal circles. Few wanted to be on the receiving end of her questioning. Witnesses, lawyers, even seasoned lawmakers often found themselves reduced to silence under her rapid-fire logic and piercing tone. Commentators had long noted her knack for humbling opponents, dissecting arguments until what remained was little more than rubble. For years she had operated with the comfort of someone who knew her place could not be questioned, who believed the authority of the robe was enough to silence dissent. But with that reputation came arrogance, quiet arrogance, polished and professional, but arrogance nonetheless. Barrett had grown used to winning not by persuasion but by intimidation, not by dialogue but by declaration. She knew the weight of her title would usually do the work for her, and over time, that certainty calcified into pride. It was pride that led her to believe Crockett could be treated like any other opponent, a voice to be dismissed, a passion to be deflated, a fire to be smothered beneath the cold certainty of reason. Pride that convinced her that composure alone, cloaked in institutional power, could crush the spirit of anyone who dared to stand opposite her. Pride that blinded her to the shifting air of America, to a generation no longer content to sit silent, while power talked down to them, and therein lay the fatal flaw. For while Barrett had sharpened her edges on years of victories, she had never truly been tested by someone who embodied not just argument but lived resilience. Her sharpness could slice through logic, but she had never prepared for what happens when that sharpness meets dignity that refuses to yield. Because in Crockett, she wasn't facing just another lawyer or politician. She was facing the distilled voice of millions who had endured centuries of being talked over, belittled, underestimated. Barrett's tools, precedent, authority, intimidation were suddenly less effective against someone who had already lived through struggles no ruling or gavel could erase. The irony was cinematic. The very pride that had lifted Barrett to such dominance was about to become her greatest weakness. Her reliance on authority, her confidence that a well-timed barb could silence opposition. Her assumption that dignity could be dismantled with dismissiveness, all of it, was about to collide with a force she had never truly reckoned with. And so, as Barrett pressed forward, her tone sharp, her gaze unwavering, her confidence unshaken, the seeds of her unraveling were already being planted. She could not see it, not yet. To her it was just another opponent, another voice to reduce, another fire to extinguish. But in the silence across from her, in the poised composure of Jasmine Crockett, something unshakable was waiting. For the first time, Barrett's sharp edges were about to be blunted by something she'd never prepared for. To understand JasmineCrockett's.com in that courtroom, you have to step back and walk the long road that brought her there. Hers is not the story of someone handed power, nor of someone cloaked in institutions from the start. Hers is the story of grit, of being underestimated, dismissed, and told, time and time again, that her voice didn't belong in rooms where decisions were made. And yet each time the door was pushed shut, Crockett found another way in. She began not with privilege, but with persistence. Her early years were marked by the same obstacles faced by so many young people of color in America: the subtle dismissals, the sideways looks, the unspoken suggestion that excellence wasn't meant to wear her face. But instead of breaking her, it fueled her. It taught her to see barriers not as walls, but as challengers, things to climb, things to crack, things to overcome. When she entered the world of law, Crockett carried that resilience like armor. In courtrooms where her opponents strutted with entitlement, she was often the youngest, the only woman, the only black voice. They tried to outtalk her, to brush her aside with technicalities and smugness. But she learned something early. The law may be written in cold ink, but justice lives in how it's wielded. And Crockett wielded it with fire. She built her reputation case by case, client by client, not representing the powerful, but standing for the overlooked, the people for whom the system had little patience, little mercy, little belief. She fought. For those who couldn't afford slick attorneys or endless appeals, she became known for refusing to back down, even when the odds were stacked. Judges noticed, opponents noticed. And slowly, communities noticed too. What set her apart wasn't just skill, it was presence. She had the rare ability to absorb condescension without letting it pierce her. When others tried to dismiss her with arrogance, she didn't lash out or shrink back. She stayed steady. It rattled her opponents because they mistook composure for weakness, not realizing it was the quiet strength that comes from someone who's already fought battles outside the courtroom far harder than anything. Inside it, her rise into politics was not inevitable, it was earned. Grassroots from the ground up, built on shaking hands at community meetings, on listening when others only talked, on walking into spaces where her voice was unwelcome and refusing to leave. She spoke not with the polished distance of someone above the crowd, but with the raw truth of someone from within it. That was her weapon. That was her advantage. And yet, even as she climbed, she never forgot the hostility that often met her. Time after time, she faced opponents who believed they could silence her with status, belittle her with authority, or trap her with tradition. They were wrong, because Crockett was never playing their game. She was playing hers. She didn't just survive in hostile spaces. She thrived there. Each insult became proof of her strength. Each dismissal became fuel. Each trial became training. It was this resilience that made her more than just a politician, more than just a lawyer. She became a symbol for those who had long been told they were too loud, too bold, too different to belong in America's halls of power. She became the voice that turned silence into speech, that turned exclusion into defiance. For her supporters, this wasn't just admiration, it was personal. When they watched Crockett stand tall in hearings, they saw themselves, saw their own struggles, their own resilience reflected in her poise. And that empathy, that rooting for her, existed long before she ever opened her mouth. Audiences leaned forward when she spoke because they wanted her to win, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated. Her battles, both in court and in Congress, taught her to balance fire with grace. She learned when to unleash sharp words and when to let silence cut deeper. She learned that dignity, held firm under attack, can sometimes be the loudest rebuke. And she carried that knowledge into every confrontation, every stage, every showdown. So, when she sat across from Amy Coney Barrett in that charged courtroom, Crockett was not simply another figure at a microphone. She was the culmination of years of battles fought in places most Americans never see. She was the child told she wasn't enough, the lawyer dismissed in courtrooms, the candidate underestimated at rallies, all rolled into one unshakable presence. And this is why her silence, in that first frozen moment after Barrett's barb, wasn't weakness. It was power. It was the weight of every dismissal she had endured, distilled into composure. It was the signal that she was not rattled, not moved, not afraid. For those who knew her story, that silence thundered louder than any words could have. Every trial, every dismissal, every fight had led to this exact moment, and Crockett was ready. The clash did not simmer. It exploded. Barrett leaned forward, her voice cutting sharper with each phrase. Every syllable designed not just to argue but to dominate. She interrupted with the confidence of someone who had long believed her interruptions were law themselves. Each sentence was a scalpel, slicing, probing, daring Crockett to stumble. The chamber filled with her tone-polished, commanding, practiced to the point of arrogance. But Crockett did not stumble. She did not rise to the bait of volume or theatrics. Instead, she did something far more dangerous to Barrett's strategy. She stayed steady. Where Barrett swung wildly with power, Crockett sharpened her focus like a blade being honed. Every response was shorter, tighter, more precise. She wasn't just answering, she was countering, redirecting, forcing Barrett's blows to glance off and land empty. The room began to feel less like a courtroom and more like a boxing ring. Each exchange was a jab, each rebuttal a counterpunch. Barrett lunged with interruptions, her voice climbing higher, as if volume alone could secure victory. Crockett, however, stayed rooted, calm, but unyielding. Her precision began to land harder. Then Barrett's noise, each carefully chosen phrase leaving the chamber humming with tension. Whispers began to ripple through the audience benches. Heads turned, glances darted. A few gasps escaped as Crockett slipped in line so surgically placed they felt like body shots, quiet but devastating. Barrett's words, once smooth as marble, began to crack under their own weight. For the first time, her confidence looked less like unshakable control and more like desperation, dressed in polish. It was as if the roles were reversing in real time. The woman who had entered the room with the upper hand, cloaked in authority and precedent, now seemed cornered, while the one she sought to dismiss radiated composure. Crockett's silence between Barrett's outbursts was louder than the interruptions themselves. She let Barrett fill the air, and then with just a few measured words pulled the ground out from beneath her. The audience felt it. Each exchange tightened their chests, widened their eyes. Some leaned forward, unwilling to miss a single turn. Others shook their heads, whispering to neighbors, stunned at the unfolding reversal. Barrett's dominance, once assumed, now teetered on the edge. The gasps grew louder, the whispers sharper, as tension coiled around the chamber like smoke. And then came the moment. Barrett, her voice higher now, eyes flashing, delivered yet another cutting interruption, this one harsher, more personal, almost bitter. The chamber froze again, caught between outrage and anticipation. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if Barrett had pushed too far, the arrogance finally spilling over. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't rush. She inhaled, let the silence hang in the air like a coiled spring, and then, without raising her voice, without breaking her calm, she delivered a single, devastatingly precise sentence. And in that moment, the entire balance shifted. The chamber hung in suspended animation, the air so tight it felt like the walls themselves had stopped breathing. Barrett's interruptions still lingered like smoke in the air, bitter and stinging. All eyes shifted to Jasmine Crockett. Would she snap back? Would she let the insult settle into the record? Another scar from power unchecked? She did neither. Instead, Crockett leaned into the silence. Not a nervous silence, not an awkward pause, but a deliberate, sculpted stillness. Her eyes stayed, fixed, her breath steady, her expression calm in a way that unsettled. The longer she stayed quiet, the louder the absence of Barrett's dominance became. The silence itself became Crockett's first counterpunch. Barrett shifted in her chair. A cough echoed faintly in the gallery. The moment stretched, and suddenly the judge's authority no longer filled the room. Crockett did. And then, finally, "She spoke, Your Honor," she began, voiced even, clear, deliberate. Each word landed like a stone on water, rippling outward. "When you raise your voice, it does not make your position stronger. It only reveals how weak it already was." Gasps. Audible, sharp, undeniable. Barrett blinked, her composure fracturing for just a second. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as though realizing any attempt to respond immediately would only prove Crockett's point. The mask of confidence that had cloaked her all trial began to slip. Crockett did not rush. She let the silence follow her words, stretching the power of the moment, forcing every ear in the chamber to hang on what she might say next. "This was never about me," she continued, her voice still calm, unhurried. "It's about the people watching us Americans, who wonder if truth has a place in these halls anymore. It's about the ones who've been told their voices don't matter, that their identity disqualifies them from dignity." The chamber was still. Even the shuffling of papers, the creak of benches gone. Every person present felt as though they were witnessing not just a rebuttal, but a reclamation. Barrett's jaw tightened. Her polished confidence was suddenly brittle, fragile. She attempted to interject, but her tone cracked on the first syllable, betraying the unease creeping up her spine. Crockett did not even turn her head toward hers. She continued speaking, as though Barrett's interruptions had been reduced to background noise. "You see," Judge Crockett said, her words landing like strikes in a perfectly measured rhythm. "Arrogance may silence the timid, but it does not silence truth and dignity. Dignity does not tremble in the face of titles or robes. It endures." A low murmur ran through the gallery, not disrespectful, but electric. People turned to one another, eyebrows raised, mouths parted. It wasn't just Crockett's words, it was her control, her refusal to be shaken, her ability to weaponize calm against chaos. Barrett's face flushed faintly. She tried again, louder now, but the force was gone. Her words tangled, her phrasing stumbled. For someone so revered for verbal precision, cracks were unmistakable. Crockett tilted her head slightly, her tone soft but cutting as glass. "Respect," she said, "is not commanded by shouting down those you fear. It is earned by listening, by protecting, by serving. And if this chamber forgets that, then it is my duty to remind it." The words hung there like a gavel strike, sharper than any ruling. For a moment, no one moved. Even Barrett sat frozen, her usual arsenal of authority disarmed in real time. And then, like the slow ignition of a flame, the weight of what had just happened began to spread. A reporter scribbled furiously in the corner. A spectator in the back clutched their phone tighter, already imagining the headlines. Somewhere, someone whispered, "That's it." But that's the moment. Crockett let her eyes sweep the chamber. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. Her expression was one of solemn conviction. She hadn't destroyed Barrett for spectacle. She had redirected the attack into something larger, something that transcended the personal clash. "This is about justice," she concluded, her voice steady, unwavering. "It is about whether our courts reflect the people they serve or merely the power they protect." Silence. Silence so absolute it felt like the world outside had paused to listen. Barrett lowered her gaze, just slightly, as though aware she had lost ground that could never be regained. The judge's gavel rested uselessly in her hand. No strike could erase what had just been spoken. Crockett leaned back, her point made, her calm intact. She had not shouted. She had not needed to. She had used precision, restraint, and truth to pierce the armor of arrogance, and in doing so, she had shifted the balance of power. The chamber was still holding its breath when the realization began to ripple. They had just witnessed a viral moment in real time. A soundbite born not from rage but from restraint. One that would echo far beyond the walls of that courtroom. And in that stunned silence, the internet found its spark. The silence inside the chamber did not last long. It broke like glass once the doors opened, spilling into the outside world where cameras, microphones, and restless hands clutching phones were waiting. Within minutes, JasmineCrockett's.com. Surgical counterattack was no longer confined to the courtroom, it was everywhere. The first clip hit Twitter. A 10-second slice. Barrett mid-interruption, Crockett leaning forward. Her voice steady as she delivered the line that froze the room. When you raise your voice, it does not make your position stronger. Oh! It only reveals how weak it already. Was all it took? Within half an hour, the hashtag Crockett Clapback began climbing. By the end of the afternoon, it was trending at #1 nationwide. Tweets poured in from every corner. Lawyers, comedians, students, nurses on break shifts, teenagers with ring lights, all sharing and resharing the clip. Some paired it with fire emojis, others with boxing gifs. Crockett cast as the fighter who landed the knockout without ever lifting a glove. Then came #Barrett exposed. This one was merciless. Users slowed down the video to replay the exact moment. Barrett's voice cracked. Memes flooded the timeline, Barrett holding a mic and dropping it herself. Barrett edited into a video game defeat screen. Oh, Barrett's gavel morphing into a broken crutch. For years, she had projected power, but in one afternoon, TikTok editors turned her composure into a punchline. And then, like thunder chasing lightning, the storm grew. #trial flip 22.5. The phrase captured the collective awe, the sense that something monumental had just turned on its head. TikToks with dramatic music overlays soared past 1 million views. Teenagers who knew little about law suddenly quoted Crockett in classrooms. A single remix of her voice over a trap beat hit 1 million streams on SoundCloud within 24 hours. The commentariat scrambled to keep up. Cable news producers cut into their programming to replay the clip in a loop, anchors barely able to mask their astonishment. One commentator said, "I've been covering courts for 30 years, and I have never seen a Supreme Court justice visibly rattled like this." Another added, "Crockett didn't just hold her own shy redefined what holding your own looks like in America." Celebrities joined the chorus. Kerry Washington tweeted a line of clapping emojis with Crockett's quote. John Legend shared a video praising her composure. Even athletes, known more for post-game interviews than politics, dropped in. "That's how you play the long game," one NBA star wrote. But it wasn't just praise. It was validation. Activists spoke of how Crockett's restraint mirrored their own daily battles in boardrooms, classrooms, and neighborhoods where dignity was tested by arrogance. Immigrant rights groups reposted her lines alongside photos of rallies. For them, Crockett wasn't just a politician. She was a mirror, reflecting the resilience they lived every day. Meanwhile, Barrett's defenders tried to strike back. A handful of conservative pundits framed her stumble as unfairly magnified. The result of out-of-context internet editing, but the tide was too strong. Every attempt to reclaim the narrative was drowned by remix videos, duets, and memes. Multiplying by the second, it felt less like a moment and more like a movement. The virality wasn't contained to screens, it leaked into conversations across dinner tables, subway rides, coffee shops. Clips played on loop in barbershops and college lounges. Young organizers cited it in speeches. Teachers slipped it into lectures about rhetoric and persuasion. By nightfall, the hashtags had become a living organism, pulsing, growing, reshaping the public imagination. Crockett wasn't just the protagonist of a courtroom clash, she was now the face of a digital uprising that celebrated calm as the ultimate weapon, truth as the ultimate shield. Still, as the laughter rolled in, as the remixes stacked views, in the millions, A quieter current was beginning to form beneath the noise. Beyond the hashtags and the humor, past the parodies and the punchlines, something deeper was taking hold. The country wasn't just entertained, it was confronted. People were asking themselves what it meant that dignity could disarm arrogance so completely. They were asking who really held the power when the robes, titles, and gavels no longer commanded respect by themselves, and that questioned the one swelling beneath. The storm was about to shape the next phase of the story, because beyond the hashtags and the humor, a deeper lesson was beginning to sink in. In the hours that followed, when the storm of hashtags and memes began to quiet into reflection, a different story emerged, one that wasn't about clips or viral remixes, but about meaning. What people had witnessed in that courtroom was more than a flash of drama. It was a lesson delivered in real time about the strength that defines America at its best. For all of Barrett's towering credentials, her polished diction, her seat on the highest bench in the land, she had chosen volume as her weapon. She pressed harder, spoke louder, tried to overwhelm. But volume is not power, it is its imitation. And in that chamber, it cracked. The lesson stretched beyond the courtroom. Viewers saw themselves in Crockett's poise, the immigrant worker, silenced in a meeting but refusing to bow. The young activist dismissed as naive until their movement swelled into change. The parent teaching their child that respect isn't weakness but power. In her restraint, Crockett had spoken for them all. This was not a victory of personality. It was a victory of principle. America at its best does not reward the loudest voice. It rewards the clearest truth. And in that moment, truth sat calmly in Crockett's seat. In moments like these, a commentator said the next morning, America remembers who we are. And that line echoed, spread, quoted in posts, written in op-eds, spoken in classrooms. Because it was more than commentary, it was revelation. Who we are is not defined by titles or robes, not by the arrogance of power, but by the dignity of those who refuse to be broken. Crockett did not win because she humiliated Barrett. She won because she reminded America of its deeper promise that justice is not about ego, it is about service. That power is not about shouting, it is about listening. That strength is not found in chaos, but in composure. The moral was simple, yet eternal. Truth is greater than arrogance. Composure stronger than chaos. Justice higher than ego. And so, as the storm of virality softened into memory, what lingered was not the clash, but the clarity. A new archetype had been carved into the American imagination, the figure who does not just fight back, but rises above. The one who shows that dignity is not silence, but strength refined. And for countless viewers, it was more than a story to watch. It was a standard to carry, because in the end, the hashtags faded, the remixes slowed, the news cycles moved forward. But the image of Crockett, poised and unshaken, remains. A reminder that when arrogance roars, dignity does not need to roar back. It only needs to stand calm and clear until the noise collapses under its own weight. And as America took in that truth, the story was no longer just about Crockett or Barrett. It was about all of us, about what kind of strength we choose to honor, what kind of justice we choose to defend, and what kind of America we want to remember. And so, the headline that began with Judge Amy Coney Barrett attacks Jasmine Crockett ended with something no one could have predicted: Barrett's attempt to shame, overturned by Crockett's viral reversal. What began as a moment of arrogance transformed into a living example of resilience. What was meant to diminish one voice instead amplified it for millions. This wasn't just a courtroom clash. It was a mirror showing America what happens when power believes itself untouchable, and what happens when dignity refuses to yield. Crockett didn't just defend herself. She reminded us all that true authority doesn't come from a robe or a gavel. It comes from clarity, composure, and courage. Barrett tried to impose silence through intimidation. Crockett turned silence into strength. That reversal, that flipping of the script is why this moment will be remembered. Because in the end, it proved something larger than any single trial. Power must always answer to justice, and that lesson matters beyond politics. Beyond the courtroom, it belongs to anyone who has been underestimated, dismissed, or told to sit down. It belongs to those who know that arrogance may shout, but truth endures. It belongs to every person who refuses to let ego define justice. Here at Inside Power, that's what we stand for. Not noise, not spectacle, but the truth that dignity, patience, courage will always rise higher than arrogance and ego. If you believe dignity should always triumph over arrogance, subscribe and stand with Inside Power. Join a community that won't just watch history. We'll remember it, amplify it, ensure its lessons live on. Because in moments like these, America doesn't just watch. America decides who we are.